This is recorded lesson number 4 for Tara Stout at Limestone Community High School in the Ecology unit. The last portion of the lecture notes is going to be looking at how matter cycles through ecosystems. And one of the first things to understand is that the law of conservation of matter states that matter is never created nor destroyed, it's just rearranged. So that's pretty much what this first bullet point says. Unlike energy, matter is not lost at each step of the ecological pyramid or a food chain, but rather they're recycled through the biotic and abiotic components of the ecosystem. From, I believe it was lesson 1, remember that biotic means the living parts of an environment, and abiotic, that Latin prefix a meaning not, non, against, or without, that means not living parts. So matter is going to be cycled through both parts, both living and non-living parts of an ecosystem. And when we're talking about matter, we're going to be talking about 4 different components. We're going to talk about the pure elements of phosphorus, nitrogen, and carbon, and then also the universal compound water, which is made of hydrogen and oxygen. First cycle we're going to talk about is the water cycle. Now on your test, what you will need to be able to do is look at an image, a diagram, something like the one shown here, evaluate what's going on, and be able to identify which matter cycle we're dealing with. Water is 100% crucial to life. All living things are made of water, and all living cells are made of about a 70 to 90% range of water. Everything that a cell does has to take place in the presence of water. Water is kind of like it's kind of like your poster board for doing your project. You have to have that background of water first. In fact, you couldn't even breathe without water, which sort of doesn't make sense if you think about it, because if you try to breathe underwater, things don't work out quite so hot. However, even though cells are mostly made of water, there's really only a small portion of the Earth's water that is in living things. So where is it? It's exactly where you'd think it would be. There's 3 main places: surface water, including lakes, rivers, oceans, ice, the big bodies of water that we think of when we think of water. Groundwater in the underground reservoirs, and in the atmosphere in water vapor. And just as a review, water can take all 3 forms on planet Earth. It is a liquid from 0 to 100 degrees Celsius. It becomes a solid, so ice, below 0 degrees Celsius, and then turns to gas or water vapor above 100 degrees Celsius. Now there's also a pressure component that goes along with making water go into one of those 3 different physical states. You won't need to know it for this class, but you'll learn it in your physical science courses. So here's a different image of the water cycle, but the same basic steps are happening. You're having evaporation, which is water going from the liquid state to the gas state. Condensation and then precipitation is when water goes from the gas back to a liquid, and precipitation is when it falls back to the earth. Now, over here we see evaporation is the movement of the large body of water up, but you can also talk about the movement of water in organisms. Transpiration is going to be the movement of water through plants, and it only moves in one direction, and that is up, from the roots all the way up through the shoots or the tips of the leaves. You also have excretion, which is the movement of water through animals. So let me get rid of these markings. Alright, so evaporation, as I said, is a change in state from liquid to gas. Precipitation is then when it falls back to the earth after it's gone from gas to liquid, which is condensation. Transpiration is the movement of water through plants, and you can see here it goes from roots to leaves. So it's one direction, it moves up only. Excretion is the movement of, the movement of water through animals, and it can go in any direction. And then we have decomposition. Decomposition is part of the reasons why water is everywhere, and that's because it's considered to be the universal solvent. It can break bonds in lots of different types of chemicals, and so this is going to be the last step. So decomposing must take place in the presence of water also. That's why dead organisms like leaves or animals, they get squishy. It's because their cells fall apart and that water starts to come out. Our next cycle is the carbon cycle. And some main things to look at when you are identifying the carbon cycle is going to be terms like respiration, photosynthesis, and then things like this, the burning of some sort of fuel at a factory or car emissions. Why does the carbon cycle even matter? What does it do for us? I mean, we know that we breathe out carbon dioxide, but we breathe in oxygen. So why does the carbon cycle matter? Well, carbon is actually one of the basic structures of sugars that are formed during photosynthesis. So the plants will capture the sun's energy and take in our carbon dioxide, and with the absorption of water, will do photosynthesis, which releases oxygen and C6H12O6 sort of. It's just that's a sugar term as a waste product. The original source of carbon is going to be in the atmospheric CO2. CO2, remember, stands for carbon dioxide. And that's what we breathe out. The way carbon cycles is that the plants will do photosynthesis, and they will convert the atmospheric CO2 that they absorb and the water, and they will create sugars, and then animals will eat the plants. Animals will breathe out carbon dioxide to get it back into the cycle, or animals and plants die and the carbon dioxide can be released through decay or through the burning of fossil fuels. So carbon cycles it's consumed as one organism eats another, and then it eventually returns to the atmosphere through a couple of different ways. Either by animals breathing out that CO2, dead organisms just through the process of decay and decomposition, or the burning of fossil fuels. And when it returns to the atmosphere, then the plants then again take it back up and do photosynthesis. And that's the carbon cycle. The nitrogen cycle. Now, nitrogen is in our atmosphere, but we don't breathe it in, and neither do plants. Plants take in carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, and we breathe in oxygen. So nitrogen actually makes up a huge portion of the Earth's atmosphere. And when you are trying to identify if a diagram is the nitrogen cycle, a couple of things you want to look for are the lightning strikes, and you want to look for things like bacteria and algae. You can say that the bacteria says denitrifying bacteria, and the algae says nitrifying algae. Okay, those go along with how the process of getting nitrogen into a usable form works. Let me erase this stuff so it's not going to be in our way. Nitrogen is important because it's the basic molecule in proteins. It's what makes up your amino acids. Amino acids link together to make proteins, and proteins are what determine how your body works and how your body looks. From everything such as do you have blue eyes or green eyes to are you farsighted or do you need bifocals or do you need contacts. It goes to when you run the mile? Can you breathe accordingly, or do you develop asthma? Even things like that are controlled by proteins. So as I said, a majority of the Earth's atmosphere is actually nitrogen. In fact, 78% of air is nitrogen gas, and that is a percentage that you will need to know for your test. However, as I mentioned, living things cannot use nitrogen directly from air. So it has to be converted to the usable form, and it's converted by lightning or by the denitrifying bacteria in the soil. Then, once it's converted into that usable form, it gets absorbed by the plants from the roots of the plants, which are then eaten by herbivores and omnivores. And in the omnivores and herbivores is when it's converted into those proteins that are usable, and then returned to the soil and atmosphere through decay. So that's going to be a process you're going to see or hear several times. It's going to be absorbed by plants, eaten by animals, returned to the atmosphere through decay. Absorbed by plants, eaten by animals, returned to the atmosphere by decay. So that is the nitrogen cycle. And again, the clues there, you're going to want to look for the lightning in the image. You're going to want to look for the bacteria and possibly the algae. Our last cycle is the phosphorus cycle. The process is going to be similar in that it's going to be absorbed by plants, which are eaten by animals, and then returned by decay. But the phosphorus cycle actually has a long version and a short version. When you're looking at an image, some of the parts that you're going to be your telltale signs that you're dealing with the phosphorus cycle are going to be things like rocks. And that's because phosphorus isn't necessarily going to be found abundantly in the atmosphere like nitrogen. In fact, phosphorus is going to be what make up our rocks. Why is it important? It's used in body processes. In fact, you couldn't take notes, you couldn't walk to class, your heart couldn't beat without phosphorus. Phosphorus is a major component in ATP and ADP. You don't really need to know these for this class, but ATP stands for adenosine. Whoops. Why is my pen not working? Oh well, I'm giving up on the pen. Adenosine triphosphate, and then once it goes through part of the Krebs cycle, then it becomes adenosine diphosphate. How does it cycle? Same thing. Short term, when it's already broken down, it's taken up by plants, eaten by animals, and then returned to the soil by decay. And then it's taken up by the plants, which are eaten by the animals, and returned to the soil by decay. Long term is it's deposited as ocean sediments, becomes parts of large rocks, and those large rocks, as you know, will wither away due to erosion. When that phosphorus, and that's P, is the symbol for phosphorus. Oh my word. I don't know what happened. Anyway, P is the symbol for phosphorus, and that was the end of our slideshow anyway. So once the phosphorus erodes out of the rock, it's then absorbed by the plants, which are eaten by animals, and returned by decay. So that is the end of the ecology notes. Be prepared for your next unit test, most likely on Tuesday or Wednesday of next week. Where do I stop it?